The coffee cup trembled against the saucer as Maria Santos set it down, the porcelain chattering like nervous teeth in the pre-dawn silence of Harvey's diner. Through the rain-streaked windows, downtown Seattle's neon signs bled colors across wet asphalt, painting the world in electric blues and warning reds. The clock above the coffee machine read 4:47 a.m., and the diner held only 3 souls: herself, the night cook Eddie mumbling over scrambled eggs, and the man in booth 7 who had been nursing the same black coffee for 2 hours. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Marcus Webb didn't look like the kind of man who owned half the waterfront. His navy wool coat hung on broad shoulders that spoke of manual labor in younger years, and his hands, wrapped around that coffee cup like it was an anchor, bore the calluses of someone who built his fortune from nothing. The Seattle Times business section, folded beside his plate, bore his photograph under the headline, "Webb Industries Announces Historic Downtown Development." But here, in the fluorescent honesty of Harvey's diner, he looked like any other insomniac seeking refuge from the night. Maria had been watching him for 20 minutes now, her server's intuition prickling with something she couldn't name. In 15 years of pouring coffee and taking orders, she'd learned to read people like sheet music. The desperate ones, the lonely ones, the dangerous ones. Marcus Webb was different. He sat like a man listening for something, his gray eyes scanning the parking lot every few seconds, his phone face down on the Formica table like a loaded gun. "More coffee?" she asked, approaching with the pot even though his cup was still half full. He looked up, and she saw exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. "Thank you." His voice carried the weight of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "You've been here all night?" "Since 11. Double shift." Maria refilled his cup, noting how his fingers never quite relaxed their grip. "You?" "Couldn't sleep." The admission came with a rueful smile. "Thought I'd drive around, clear my head. Saw your lights." Outside, a black sedan crawled past the diner for the 3rd time in an hour. Maria's blood chilled as she recognized the pattern, the way it slowed at the corner, the tinted windows that revealed nothing. The license plate she'd memorized without meaning to. LTD 4477. She'd seen enough late-night movies to know predatory behavior when she witnessed it. The bell above the door chimed, and Eddie emerged from the kitchen, his white apron stained with grease and his weathered face creased with concern. Eduardo, Eddie, Martinez had worked nights at Harvey's for 8 years, ever since his construction injury left him unable to handle the physical demands of his old job. At 62, he moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had been tested by life and found its limits. "Everything okay out here?" Eddie asked, his eyes following Maria's gaze to the window. "That car has been circling like a shark." Marcus turned sharply, his businessman's composure cracking to reveal something harder underneath. "What car?" "Black sedan," Maria said quietly. "Been out there for over an hour. They're watching." The 3 of them stood in the artificial daylight of the diner, bound together by an invisible thread of shared unease. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar rhythm, the neon beer signs hummed their electric lullabies, but the ordinary sounds of the night shift couldn't mask the tension that had settled over Harvey's diner like fog rolling in from Elliott Bay. Marcus's phone buzzed against the table. The caller ID read "Home Security," and Maria watched the color drain from his face as he answered. "Webb here." His voice had gone flat, professional. "What? When?" A pause that stretched like piano wire. "Are you certain?" Another pause, longer this time. "I understand. Thank you." He set the phone down with the careful control of a man trying not to shatter. Maria had seen that look before, on the faces of customers who just received news that changed everything. The death of a parent, a diagnosis, a betrayal. "Sir?" she ventured. Marcus looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. Maria Santos, 43 years old, single mother of 2 teenagers, survivor of more storms than anyone should have to weather. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her uniform was pressed despite the long shift, and her brown eyes held the kind of warmth that made strangers feel safe enough to share their secrets. "There's been a break-in at my house," he said finally. 3 men, armed. They're still there, waiting. The words hit the diner like stones thrown into still water, sending ripples of understanding through all 3 of them. Eddie cursed softly in Spanish, crossing himself out of habit. Maria felt her heart hammering against her ribs as the pieces clicked into place. The circling car, the late-night vigil, the way Marcus had been checking his phone like a countdown timer. "They're here for you," she whispered. "Looks that way." Marcus stood, reaching for his wallet. "I should call the police, get a hotel room, figure this out in daylight." "No!" The word came out sharper than Maria intended, stopping him mid-motion. "You can't leave now, not with them watching." Through the window, the black sedan had returned, parking beneath the broken street light across from the diner's entrance. Maria could see the silhouettes of at least 2 figures inside, waiting with the patience of professionals. Eddie moved to the window, keeping to the shadows. "Engine's running. They're not going anywhere." Maria's mind raced through possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. In the movies, this was where the hero made a dramatic escape, where quick thinking and good timing saved the day. But this wasn't a movie. This was Harvey's diner at 5 in the morning with 2 service employees and a millionaire businessman trapped by circumstances none of them had asked for. "Why?" she asked Marcus. "Why would someone want to hurt you?" He sat back down heavily, as if the weight of the question was too much to bear standing. "Take your pick. The waterfront development displaces some people, the casino project kills others. I've been getting threats for months, but security said it was probably just what? Empty threats?" Eddie shook his head. "Brother, when people are watching your house and following you around the city, the threats ain't empty anymore." Maria poured herself a cup of coffee, her hand steadier now that she'd found her footing in this surreal situation. "Tell us about the development. Who's angry enough to kill you over it?" The question seemed to unlock something in Marcus. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to the confessional tone that late-night diners seemed to inspire. "Pike Place market expansion. 50-year development deal with the city. We're talking about modernizing the infrastructure, adding luxury condos, high-end retail, bringing real money to the waterfront. And pushing out how many families?" "That's what the opposition says. The Waterfront Preservation Alliance, led by this woman named Catherine Reeves. They've been fighting us in court, organizing protests, making noise about protecting Seattle's soul from corporate interests." Marcus rubbed his temples. "But it's legal. Everything we're doing is completely legal." Eddie shook his head. "Legal don't always mean right, boss." "And right don't always mean profitable," Maria added, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, I don't know your situation."
"No, you're right to question it." Marcus met her eyes with surprising honesty. "I've been telling myself this project will help the city, bring jobs, increase tax revenue. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I wonder if I'm just another rich guy changing things because I can." The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than anything that usually passed between strangers. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. The black sedan remained motionless, its occupants invisible behind tinted glass. Maria's phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. "Mom, can't sleep. Bad storm. Are you safe at work?" The message reminded her of what she had to lose. Sophia, 17 and college-bound, and Miguel, 15 and testing every boundary he could find. They were sleeping in their small apartment 6 blocks away, trusting that their mother would come home safely from another night shift at Harvey's diner. "I need to know," she said to Marcus. "Are we in danger just for being here with you?" "I don't know." The honesty in his voice was more frightening than a lie would have been. "I really don't know." Eddie checked the back exit, the one that led to the alley behind the diner. Could be they're just watching, waiting for you to leave alone. Could be they figure anyone with you is collateral damage. The phrase collateral damage hit Maria like cold water. She thought of her children, of the bills piled on her kitchen table, of the second job interview she had scheduled for next Tuesday. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built since her divorce 5 years ago, suddenly felt fragile as spun glass. But looking at Marcus Webb, this man who'd stumbled into her diner carrying his own storm clouds, she felt something else too. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who'd made choices that led to consequences. Someone who was learning that money and power couldn't shield you from every danger. "The security company," she said. "What exactly did they tell you?" Marcus checked his phone. Motion sensors triggered at 11:43 p.m. 3 figures on the thermal cameras. They disabled the main security panel, but the backup system is still transmitting. The police were called, but... He paused, scrolling through his messages. The response was delayed due to a major incident downtown. Multiple units tied up. "Convenient," Eddie muttered. Maria felt the pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. What if it's not random? What if someone wanted the police busy elsewhere tonight? The implications of that thought settled over them like smoke. If Marcus's enemies had the resources to plan this carefully, to coordinate a distraction that would pull police away from his neighborhood, then this wasn't amateur revenge. This was professional, organized, and probably very well funded. Marcus's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. He hesitated, finger hovering over the decline button. "Answer it," Maria said. "Put it on speaker." The voice that emerged was electronically distorted, robbed of gender and age, but not of menace. "Mr. Webb, we know you're not at home." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "What do you want?" "You know what we want. The Pike Place project dies. Tomorrow, public announcement that Webb Industries is withdrawing completely. And if I refuse, then you won't live to see your grand opening." The line went dead. In the silence that followed, Maria could hear the hum of the refrigerators, the tick of the wall clock, the distant rumble of early morning traffic beginning to build on the interstate. Normal sounds of a normal night that felt anything but normal. Well, at least now we know what we're dealing with. But Maria was thinking about something else. The caller's phrasing, the specific knowledge they'd displayed, the timing of everything. "Marcus, who else knew you'd be out tonight? Who knew you couldn't sleep?"
He considered the question. "My assistant, my driver, my security team. Maybe my ex-wife, but we barely speak anymore." A pause. "Why?" "Because they found you here at Harvey's diner at 5 in the morning after you made an unplanned drive to clear your head." Maria felt the server's intuition that had kept her safe for 15 years lighting up like a fire alarm. Either you're the unluckiest man in Seattle or someone's been tracking your every move. The black sedan's engine revved once, twice, a signal, or perhaps a threat. Through the rain-streaked windows, Maria saw a second car approaching from the opposite direction, this one a dark SUV with windows equally opaque. "We need to call the police," Marcus said, but even as he spoke, he seemed to realize the futility of it. "And tell them what?" Eddie asked. "That some millionaire is getting death threats over his development project? That we're scared of cars parked on a public street? By the time they take it seriously, we'll be dead." Maria made a decision that surprised even her. "No, we're not calling anyone. We're going to figure this out ourselves." Both men stared at her. Marcus spoke first. "Maria, I appreciate the thought, but this isn't your fight. It became my fight when they parked outside my workplace." She poured herself another cup of coffee, her movements deliberate and calm. "Besides, you said it yourself. You don't know who you can trust. Your security team, your assistant, someone close to you is feeding information to people who want you dead.
So what are you suggesting? Maria looked around Harvey's diner. The red vinyl booths, the black and white checkered floor, the framed photographs of old Seattle that covered the walls like memories. This place had been her anchor for years, the steady job that let her keep her children fed and safe. It wasn't much, but it was honest work in an honest place. I'm suggesting we turn this diner into exactly what it's always been, a place where people can be safe while they figure out their next move. She met Marcus's eyes. You said you've been questioning whether this development is right. Maybe it's time to listen to that voice. You want me to cave to terrorists? I want you to consider the possibility that the people threatening you aren't the only ones who think your project is wrong. Outside, the SUV had joined the sedan. 4 vehicles total now, arranged like chess pieces around Harvey's diner. Professional, patient, and undoubtedly armed. Eddie locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and turned off the neon open sign. Well, looks like we're committed now. But Maria was studying Marcus's face, reading the conflict there like a map of a territory she knew well, the space between what you want and what you need, between what's profitable and what's right. She'd navigated that territory herself more times than she could count. Tell me about Catherine Reeves, the woman leading the opposition. What's she really like? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes focused somewhere beyond the diner's walls. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of reluctant admiration. Smart, passionate. She grew up in Pike Place Market. Her grandmother ran a flower stand there for 40 years. Catherine spent her whole life watching that community, fighting to preserve it. And you're about to destroy it. I'm about to modernize it. There's a difference. Maria raised an eyebrow. Is there? The question hung between them like morning fog, and Marcus found himself thinking about Catherine Reeves in ways that made him uncomfortable. He'd seen her speak at city council meetings, watched her organize protests with the kind of quiet determination that moved mountains one stone at a time. She never raised her voice, never resorted to the theatrical anger that marked so many activists. She simply spoke truth in a way that made his carefully crafted development presentations sound like the corporate doublespeak they probably were. Tell me about your average day, Maria said, refilling his coffee. Before all this started, what does Marcus Webb do when he wakes up in the morning? The question caught him off guard. In business, people asked about quarterly projections, market strategies, profit margins. No one ever asked about the quiet moments between meetings, the spaces where a person actually lived. I wake up at 5:30. Coffee first. Good coffee, not the instant stuff I grew up on. I read 3 newspapers while I ate breakfast, always the same breakfast. Steel-cut oats, fresh berries, orange juice. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, has been making it the same way for 6 years. Creature of habit, Eddie observed from behind the counter, where he was cleaning the grill with methodical precision. Guilty, Marcus smiled ruefully. I drive myself to work. I know I could afford a driver, but I like those 20 minutes alone in the car. I listen to NPR, sometimes classical music. Get to the office by 7 before anyone else arrives. Maria settled into the booth across from him, cradling her own coffee cup. Outside, the surveillance vehicles maintained their positions like patient predators. The normalcy of this conversation felt surreal under the circumstances, but she sensed that Marcus needed to talk, needed to remember who he was beneath the businessman's armor. What do you think about during those drives? She asked. Everything, nothing. He paused, considering. I think about my father mostly. He died when I was 16, heart attack at 52, blue-collar guy who worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my mother got sick. He never saw any of this. Marcus gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the diner, but the life he built. Sometimes I wonder what he'd think of the Pike Place project. What do you think he'd think? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee even though he'd added nothing to it.
He'd ask me who it really helps. That was always his question when I'd come home complaining about school, about kids picking on me for wearing secondhand clothes, about feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. Who does it really help, Marcus? Like that was the only measurement that mattered. Through the window, Maria could see the rain beginning to lighten, the first pale hints of dawn creeping across the Seattle skyline. Soon, the morning shift would arrive, if they were allowed to. Soon, her regular customers would expect Harvey's diner to be open, serving coffee and comfort to the early risers of the city. "Tell me about the Pike Place project," she pressed gently. "Who does it really help?" On paper, everyone. Job creation, increased tax revenue, modernized infrastructure that can handle the next 50 years of tourism and growth. Marcus met her eyes. In practice, it helps people like me, people who can afford to shop in high-end retail, who want to live in luxury condos with water views. It helps developers and city officials who need to show progress and growth. And the flower vendors, the fishmongers, the families who've been there for generations, they get relocated, compensated. We're not kicking them out into the street. But even as he said it, Marcus could hear the hollow ring of rationalization in his voice. Eddie turned from the grill, his weathered hands still holding the cleaning cloth. "Mr. Webb, can I tell you something?"
Please. My family came here from El Salvador in 1983. My father worked the docks, my mother cleaned houses. We lived in a little apartment above a bodega in Georgetown, a place that's been torn down now, replaced by condos that rent for more than my father made in 6 months. Eddie's voice carried no anger, just the weight of experience. I'm not saying you're a bad man, but I've seen this story before. The suits come in, talk about improvement and progress, and the people who build the neighborhood get improved right out of it. Maria watched Marcus absorb this, saw something shift in his expression. "What happened to your family?" "We adapted. We survived. My parents never owned anything, so they couldn't lose what they never had. But the community, that's harder to rebuild. The bodega where my mother bought groceries and gossiped with the other women, gone. The church where we went to Mass every Sunday, sold to make room for a parking garage. The roots got pulled up, you know? People scattered." I never thought about it that way. Marcus's admission was quiet, almost lost in the hum of the diner's refrigerators. "Most developers don't," Maria said. "It's not personal to them. It's just business. But it's personal to the people getting displaced." "Yes." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Catherine Reeves' number. He'd acquired it months ago, thinking he might try to negotiate with her privately, away from the lawyers and city officials. He'd never made the call. "What are you thinking?" Maria asked. "I'm thinking maybe it's time to have a conversation I should have started a long time ago." But before he could dial, his phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Jennifer Chen, his housekeeper. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he answered. "Mrs. Chen, are you all right?" "Mr. Webb." She voice has been thin with fear, the English she'd worked so hard to perfect strained by terror. "Men came to the house. They asked about you, where you go, what you do. I told them nothing, but they searched everything, took your papers, your computer. Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" "No hurt, but scared. Very scared. They said to tell you that they know everything now. All your secrets." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down with trembling hands, the implications hitting him like physical blows. Mrs. Chen, 68 years old, grandmother of 5, who made his breakfast every morning and worried about him like a mother, had been terrorized because of his business decisions. "They went through my house, took my files, my computer. Mrs. Chen, she's been with me since I bought the house. She doesn't deserve this." Maria reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The gesture was simple, instinctive, the kind of comfort she'd given her children after nightmares, her customers after bad news, Herself, after her divorce papers were signed. We're gonna figure this out. How? They have my files, they know my business, they've probably got enough information to destroy me professionally even if they don't kill me. Marcus looked around the diner with something approaching despair, and I've dragged you both into it. Eddie poured fresh coffee for all of them, the routine action steadying in its normalcy. Mr. Webb, in my experience, when people go to this much trouble to stop something, it's usually because that something is either very wrong or very right. Now, given what you've told us about your project, which do you think it is? The question hit home in a way that surprised Marcus. He thought about the feasibility studies he'd commissioned, the environmental impact reports, the community feedback sessions where Catherine Reeves had stood up time and again to voice her concerns. He'd dismissed most of it as NIMBY opposition, the inevitable resistance to progress and change. But sitting here in Harvey's diner, surrounded by the kind of working-class community his project would displace, he was beginning to see it differently. I think, he said slowly, it might be very wrong. Maria felt something shift in the atmosphere of the diner, as if a weight they'd all been carrying had suddenly become shareable. Tell us about the first time you saw Pike Place Market, not as a developer, as a person. Marcus closed his eyes, reaching back through years of business meetings and profit projections to find that memory. I was 12. My mother was going through chemo, and we'd driven up from Olympia for her treatment at Swedish Medical. She was so sick after the sessions that we'd have to wait hours before she could handle the drive home. His voice took on the cadence of someone revisiting sacred ground. Dad would take me to the market while we waited. We couldn't afford much, maybe some day-old pastries, coffee for him, but he'd walk me through every aisle, show me the fish throwing, the flower stalls, the musicians playing for tips. He'd say, "Look at this, Marcus. This is what community looks like. All these different people, different backgrounds, but they're making something beautiful together." "When did you stop seeing it that way?" Maria asked gently. "When I got successful enough to think I could improve on it." The admission came with a bitter laugh. "When I started seeing inefficiencies instead of character, profit potential instead of community, when I convinced myself that modernization was the same thing as making something better." Through the window, Maria could see more vehicles arriving, a third sedan, another SUV, even what looked like a van parked at the far end of the block. The net was tightening around Harvey's diner, and she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She thought of her children, probably awake now and wondering why she wasn't home yet. But she also thought about Mrs. Chen, terrified in her own home because she worked for the wrong person. About Catherine Reeves, fighting to preserve something beautiful that powerful men wanted to tear down. About Marcus Webb, who'd built a fortune but was only now discovering what it had cost him. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. At this point, I'll try anything." Maria pulled out her own phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the number she needed. "I'm going to call Catherine Reeves. I'm going to tell her exactly what's happening here, and I'm going to ask her to help us." Marcus stared at her. "You want to call the leader of the opposition? The woman who spent months trying to destroy my project?" "I want to call the woman who might be the only person in Seattle who knows more about your enemies than you do." The logic was unassailable, even if it felt like surrender. Marcus nodded slowly. "Do it." Maria dialed the number Marcus provided, putting the call on speaker as it rang once, twice, 3 times. She expected voicemail, an assistant, the polite barriers that usually surrounded public figures. Instead, Catherine Reeves answered on the 4th ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. "This is Catherine." "Ms. Reeves, my name is Maria Santos. I'm calling about Marcus Webb. He's in trouble, and I think you might be able to help him." "How did you get this number? And why would I help Marcus Webb with anything?" "Because someone's trying to kill him, and I think it's connected to Pike Place Market. And because he's sitting right here, ready to listen to what you've been trying to tell him for months." Another pause, longer this time. When Catherine spoke again, her voice carried a different quality. Not the public persona of an activist, but the private concern of someone who understood that death threats changed everything. Electrical problems, Marcus said quickly. That's what the investigation concluded. Old wiring, safety violations. I had nothing to do with the fire itself. But I knew about the electrical issues 6 months before it burned. The community center board asked for help. They needed $50,000 to bring the building up to code. I could have written that check from petty cash. His voice broke slightly. Instead, I waited. Let them struggle. Let the violations pile up. Let the city pressure them to close. When the fire happened, I was able to buy the lot for a fraction of its value. The silence that followed was thick with judgment and understanding. Maria had seen the aftermath. Families mourning not just a building, but a piece of their heritage. Children who'd lost their connection to their grandparents' language. Elderly people who'd lost their gathering place. How many projects? She asked. 12 major developments over 15 years. Maybe 200 businesses displaced, 800 families relocated. Marcus stared into his coffee as if it might hold absolution. All legal, all profitable, all justified by economic development and urban renewal. Eddie leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, and all designed to move poor people out of the way of rich people. That wasn't the intention, wasn't it? The challenge hung in the air between them. Outside, a new vehicle had arrived, a news van, its satellite dish gleaming in the morning light. Maria felt her heart race as she realized what this meant. They leaked it. Someone called the media. Marcus grabbed his phone, checking news sites and social media feeds. Within minutes, he found the story spreading across Twitter like wildfire. Millionaire developer barricaded in diner after death threats. The early reports were thin on details, but heavy on speculation. By noon, every major news outlet in Seattle would be camped outside Harvey's diner. "This is bad," Marcus muttered. "This makes me look guilty of something." "Maybe because you are," Maria said quietly. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed David Sterling, his attorney and oldest friend. Marcus hesitated, remembering Catherine Reeves' warning about trusting anyone close to him, but ultimately answered. "David, you've seen the news." "Marcus, what the hell is going on? I've got reporters calling me, asking about death threats in Pike Place Market. Are you safe?" "For now. I'm at Harvey's diner with some people who are helping me figure this out." "Harvey's diner? Jesus, Marcus, get somewhere secure. My office, the country club, anywhere but some greasy spoon on Aurora Avenue." Maria bristled at the dismissive tone, but held her tongue. She'd heard that attitude before, the casual contempt that rich people showed for places like Harvey's diner, as if the value of a space was determined solely by its zip code and clientele.
David, I need you to pull the files on all my development projects from the last 5 years. Cross-reference the displaced businesses and residents. Look for patterns, connections. Someone's coordinating this, and they know details about my business that aren't public record. I'll get my team on it, but Marcus, you need to get somewhere safe and let me handle the media response. This story is going to get ugly fast. Actually, I'm thinking about making a different kind of statement. The pause on David's end stretched long enough that Maria wondered if the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice carried a warning that made the hair on her neck stand up. "Marcus, be very careful about what you say right now. You've got 15 years of business decisions that could be misinterpreted, taken out of context, used against you. Any statement you make needs to be carefully crafted, legally reviewed." "What if I don't want them taken out of context? What if I want to acknowledge that some of my decisions have hurt people?" "Then you're talking about civil liability, wrongful displacement lawsuits, potentially criminal charges depending on what you've done. As your attorney, I'm advising you to say nothing until we've assessed the full scope of your exposure." Marcus ended the call feeling more isolated than before.
Even David, who'd known him since college, was treating this as a legal problem to be managed rather than a moral crisis to be resolved. "Your lawyer sounds like a real charmer," Eddie observed. "He's protecting his client. That's what I pay him for." But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that David's advice was designed to protect Webb Industries more than Marcus Webb the person. Maria's phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter. "Mom, there's news trucks outside your diner. Are you okay? Should we come get you?" The message reminded Maria of everything she had to lose by staying involved in this situation. Sophia and Miguel needed her safe, needed the steady income from Harvey's diner, needed their mother to make smart decisions that protected their family. Getting involved in a millionaire's moral crisis was not a smart decision by any reasonable measure. But looking at Marcus, this man who was finally seeing the real cost of his success, she couldn't bring herself to abandon him. Not when she could see in his eyes the same look her own children got when they realized they'd made a mistake that couldn't be easily fixed. "Stay home," she texted back. "I'm safe. We'll explain everything later." Another vehicle pulled up outside, this one a police cruiser that parked beside the news van. Maria felt a moment of relief until she saw the officer's body language. Instead of approaching the diner to check on their safety, he seemed to be coordinating with the surveillance teams, speaking into his radio while gesturing toward the building. "That doesn't look right," Eddie muttered, peering through the blinds he'd adjusted for a better view. Marcus followed his gaze and felt his blood chill. "That's Detective Ray Morrison. He's been investigating the opposition to my projects for months, looking into whether their protests crossed any legal lines." "You had the police investigating your opponents?" Maria's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Not directly. But when you're dealing with organized resistance to major development projects, you use every legal tool available. Morrison's been feeding me information about protest leaders, their funding sources, their strategies." The implications hit all three of them simultaneously. If Detective Morrison was working with Marcus, and if Morrison was now coordinating with the people threatening Marcus, then the corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. "He's dirty," Eddie said flatly. "Your cop friend is working for the other side." Marcus stared at his phone, scrolling through months of text exchanges with Morrison. Updates on protest plans, background checks on opposition leaders, warnings about potential security threats. All of it had seemed like legitimate law enforcement cooperation at the time. Now it looked like an elaborate intelligence operation designed to give Marcus's enemies everything they needed to destroy him. "They know everything," he whispered. "Every meeting, every decision, every vulnerability. Morrison's been feeding them information for months." Through the window, Maria could see Detective Morrison approaching the diner, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. Behind him, the surveillance teams were moving into position, no longer bothering to maintain the pretense of being uninvolved observers. "Back door," she said urgently. "We need to leave now." But Eddie was already checking the rear exit, and his expression told them everything they needed to know. "Two men in the alley, armed. They've got us boxed in." The trap was closing with professional precision. Maria felt the walls of Harvey's diner, her sanctuary, her workplace, her second home, becoming a prison. She thought of her children, of the life she'd built through 15 years of honest work, and realized that it might all be ending because she'd chosen to help a stranger in trouble. Marcus seemed to reach the same conclusion. "I'm going to surrender. Walk out the front door. Let them take me. You two have nothing to do with this." "Like hell," Maria shot back. "You think they're going to let us walk away after everything we've heard? We're witnesses now. We know about Morrison, about the surveillance, about the coordination. We're as dangerous to them as you are." The truth of it settled over them like a shroud. They were all in this now, bound together by circumstances none of them had chosen, but all of them would have to live with, assuming they lived at all. Marcus's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID was blocked, but they all knew who it would be. "Answer it. Put it on speaker." The electronically distorted voice filled the diner like smoke. "Mr. Webb, You've been busy making new friends. What do you want? What we've always wanted. The Pike Place project dies, but now we need something else. Your friend's silence. Permanently. Maria felt ice in her veins. We haven't done anything wrong. You've chosen the wrong side, Miss Santos. You and Mr. Martinez are now complications that need to be resolved. Eddie stepped closer to the phone, his voice steady despite the circumstances. And if we choose differently, if we walk away and forget everything we've heard, too late for that. You know about Detective Morrison. You know about our organization. You've become part of the story, which means you need to become part of the solution. Which is, Mr. Webb announces the cancellation of Pike Place development, takes full responsibility for his past crimes against Seattle's communities, and transfers $20 million to a restoration fund for displaced residents. In exchange, all three of you live to see tomorrow. The demand hung in the air like a challenge. $20 million, a significant portion of Marcus's liquid assets, but not enough to bankrupt him. It was almost reasonable, which made it more frightening than an impossible demand would have been. And if I refuse, then Harvey's diner burns down with all three of you inside. Tragic accident, electrical fire, maybe. Very sad loss for the community.
The call ended, leaving them in a silence broken only by the hum of refrigerators and the distant sound of traffic. Outside, the news crews were setting up cameras, preparing to broadcast whatever happened next to the entire city. Maria thought about the Filipino community center Marcus had mentioned, the electrical fire that had cleared the way for his marina development. The symmetry was too perfect to be coincidental. Harvey's diner would become another tragic accident that conveniently solved someone's problems. "They're not bluffing," she said. "They've done this before." Marcus nodded slowly. "The community center. I always wondered if it was really an accident. And now you know." But even as fear coursed through her veins, Maria felt something else building, a cold anger that had been growing since she'd watched Marcus catalog his victims, since she'd realized how many families had been scattered by his ambition. The people threatening them might be criminals, but Marcus Webb was no innocent victim. $20 million, she said thoughtfully. That's not revenge money. That's compensation. What do you mean? I mean, whoever's organizing this isn't just trying to stop your Pike Place project. They're trying to make you pay for all the others, the Belltown apartments, the Georgetown Marina, all of it. They want justice for the families you displaced. Marcus stared at her. You think I should pay it? I think you should want to pay it. The accusation hit harder than any threat. Marcus found himself thinking about Mrs. Chen, terrorized in her own home, about the Filipino families who'd lost their community center, about 48 families evicted from the Belltown apartments to make room for luxury condos. Even if I wanted to, I can't just transfer $20 million based on a phone threat. There are legal procedures, documentation requirements, board approvals. There are ways, Eddie interrupted. Wire transfers, cryptocurrency, offshore accounts. If you want to move money fast and quiet, it can be done. Both Marcus and Maria stared at him. Eddie shrugged. What? You think a guy who works nights at a diner doesn't know anything about moving money? I've got family in 3 countries and friends who've had to get creative about supporting them. There are always ways. Before Marcus could respond, a new sound cut through the morning air. The whine of approaching sirens, multiple vehicles coming fast. Through the window, Maria could see Detective Morrison speaking urgently into his radio, his relaxed posture suddenly tense. Something's changed, she said. The sirens grew louder, and suddenly the street outside Harvey's diner was flooded with legitimate police vehicles, marked units, unmarked sedans, even what looked like a SWAT van. The surveillance teams that had been closing in on the diner were now scattering, some fleeing on foot, others attempting to blend in with the arriving officers. Marcus's phone rang. Catherine Reeves.
"Don't go outside," she said without preamble. "I called in some favors, got real police involved. But Morrison's dirty, and we don't know how many others are compromised. Stay inside until I can sort out who's who." "How did you—"
"I've been fighting powerful interest in this city for 20 years, Mr. Webb. You think you're the first developer to have corrupt cops on payroll? The trick is knowing which ones you can trust." Through the window, they could see a woman in her 50s approaching the diner, flanked by two officers Maria didn't recognize. Catherine Reeves moved with the confident stride of someone who belonged wherever she chose to stand. Her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her clothing functional rather than fashionable. She looked like a high school principal or a veteran social worker, someone accustomed to dealing with powerful men who thought they could intimidate her. "Is that her?" Maria asked. Marcus nodded, watching as Catherine gestured firmly to the officers, clearly giving orders rather than taking them. Whatever favors she'd called in were substantial enough to override Detective Morrison's authority. "She looks like she could handle herself in a fight," Eddie observed. "She's been fighting my developments for months. If anyone knows who's behind this, it's her." But as they watched Catherine approach the diner, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The attack on Marcus had been too coordinated, too professional, too well-informed to be the work of grassroots activists. Even if Catherine Reeves had allies in law enforcement, even if she'd been monitoring Marcus's business dealings, the level of intelligence and organization required for this operation suggested resources far beyond those of a community preservation group. "Marcus," she said slowly, "what if Catherine Reeves isn't your enemy? What if she's being used by the same people who want you dead?" The possibility hit him like a physical blow. If Catherine was being manipulated, if the real enemy was using her legitimate opposition to his projects as cover for something larger and more sinister, then everything he thought he understood about this situation was wrong. Catherine reached the door of Harvey's diner and knocked. 3 short raps, followed by 2 longer ones, like a code. Maria unlocked the door and let her in, studying the woman who'd become the face of opposition to Webb Industries' development plans. Up close, Catherine Reeves looked tired but determined, her brown eyes sharp with intelligence and concern. She moved through the diner with the quick efficiency of someone making tactical assessments, checking sight lines and exit routes before turning her attention to the 3 people who'd spent the night trapped inside. "Mr. Webb," she said, extending her hand. "We finally meet." Marcus shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip and the directness of her gaze. "Ms. Reeves, thank you for coming. I know you have no reason to help me." "I have every reason to keep you alive. Dead developers can't cancel projects or make amends for past mistakes." The bluntness of it was almost refreshing. Maria found herself liking Catherine Reeves despite everything, or perhaps because of her refusal to soften her words for the sake of politeness. "Who's behind this?" Marcus asked. Catherine looked around the diner, her eyes settling on Eddie before returning to Marcus. "That's what we need to figure out. But first, I need to know exactly what they've demanded from you." Marcus repeated the conversation, the $20 million demand, the threat to burn down Harvey's diner. Catherine listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. $20 million for displaced residents, she said, when he finished. That's not a terrorist demand. That's a reparations payment. That's what I said, Maria added. Catherine nodded approvingly. And the timing, forcing this crisis just as the Pike Place project is moving to final approval. Someone wants to create maximum pressure and publicity. But who? Marcus asked. Who has the resources to coordinate surveillance, corrupt police officers, professional intimidation? Your preservation group? Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Webb, our annual budget is $30,000. We hold bake sales to pay for legal fees. Whoever's doing this has serious money and serious connections.
The implications settled over them like fog. If Catherine Reeves wasn't behind the threats, If her organization lacked the resources for this kind of operation, then who was? And why were they using the Pike Place development as their battleground? We need to think about who benefits, Maria said. Not just from stopping your project, but from destroying you publicly. Marcus felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form in his mind. Other developers, people who want the Pike Place market for themselves, or city officials who've been taking bribes and need a scapegoat, Eddie added. Or federal investigators looking for a high-profile case to make their careers, Catherine said grimly. Outside, the legitimate police officers were establishing a perimeter, pushing back the news crews and securing the area. But Maria noticed that Detective Morrison was nowhere to be seen. Either he'd fled with the surveillance teams, or he was coordinating the next phase of whatever plan was unfolding. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You have 1 hour to make your decision. $20 million, or Harvey's Diner becomes a memorial. An hour. 60 minutes to either bankrupt himself or watch innocent people die for his mistakes. Marcus looked around the diner, at Maria, who'd risked everything to help a stranger, at Eddie, who'd been drawn into danger through simple decency, at Catherine, who'd set aside years of opposition to try to save his life. I need to make some calls, he said. But even as he reached for his phone, Marcus knew that the real decision had already been made. The question wasn't whether he would pay, it was whether $20 million would be enough to buy not just their safety, but some small measure of redemption for 15 years of choices that had valued profit over people. The clock on the wall read 7:23 a.m. In 1 hour, Harvey's Diner would either be a crime scene or the place where Marcus Webb began the long process of making amends for the communities he'd destroyed. The call Marcus made wasn't to his banker or his attorney, it was to his accountant, Sarah Kim, a woman who'd managed his finances with quiet competence for 8 years and who'd never asked uncomfortable questions about where his money went or how it was earned. Sarah Kim, I need you to set up an emergency wire transfer, $20 million. The pause on her end stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if she'd hung up. When Sarah spoke again, her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd dealt with wealthy clients' impulsive decisions before. Mr. Webb, that's a substantial sum. May I ask the purpose? Reparations, he said simply, for communities displaced by my development projects. Another pause. Sir, a transfer of that magnitude requires documentation, board approval for corporate funds, tax implications assessment. Use my personal accounts. Whatever documentation you need, I'll sign, but I need this done within the hour. Mr. Webb, are you under duress? Are you being coerced? The question was sharper than Marcus expected, and he realized that Sarah Kim knew more about his business practices than he'd given her credit for. Why would you ask that? Because in 8 years, you've never once mentioned reparations, community restoration, or anything remotely resembling social responsibility. Your charitable giving has been limited to tax-deductible donations to arts organizations and business development funds. This request is completely out of character. Marcus felt the weight of that assessment like a physical blow. Even his accountant could see how disconnected he'd become from any sense of moral obligation to the communities his work affected. Catherine Reeves was watching him with sharp attention, clearly following his side of the conversation. When he caught her eye, she gestured for the phone. Let me talk to her, Catherine said. Marcus hesitated, then put the call on speaker. Sarah, I'm here with Catherine Reeves from the Waterfront Preservation Alliance. She can verify that this isn't a kidnapping or extortion. Miss Kim? Catherine's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with skeptical bureaucrats. I'm Catherine Reeves. You can verify my identity through the city clerk's office or the Seattle Times archives. I've been opposing Mr. Webb's developments for 2 years. I'm familiar with your organization, Miss Reeves. Are you advising Mr. Webb to make this payment? I'm advising him to stay alive long enough to cancel the Pike Place project and begin addressing the damage his previous developments have caused. The $20 million is his idea. And you believe this payment is legitimate, not the result of criminal threats? Catherine looked at Marcus, then at Maria and Eddie, considering her words carefully. Miss Kim, there are people who want Mr. Webb dead because of communities he's destroyed and families he's displaced. Whether that constitutes criminal extortion or delayed justice is a matter of perspective. Sarah Kim was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from professional caution to something approaching respect. Mr. Webb, I'll need the recipient account information and your authorization in writing, but I can have the transfer initiated within 40 minutes if you're certain this is what you want to do. I'm certain, Marcus said, surprised by how easily the words came. But, Sarah, make sure the payment is structured as voluntary restitution, not extortion compliance. I want the legal record to show that this was my choice. He ended the call and looked around the diner. Maria was studying him with new interest, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Eddie nodded approvingly from behind the counter. Catherine Reeves watched him with the wariness of someone who'd spent years fighting powerful men and wasn't ready to trust that one of them might actually be capable of change. That was the easy part, Catherine said. The hard part is figuring out who we're paying and whether $20 million will actually end this. Maria's phone buzzed with another text from her daughter. Mom, the news is saying someone important is trapped in your diner. Are you helping them? The question made Maria smile, despite the circumstances. Her children had been raised to help people in trouble, to offer comfort to strangers, to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Sophia's instinct that her mother was helping someone was exactly right. Yes, she texted back, I'm helping someone figure out how to fix some mistakes they made. But even as she sent the message, Maria was thinking about the deeper implications of what they were doing. $20 million was more money she'd earn in 10 lifetimes, enough to solve every financial problem her family had ever faced. And Marcus Webb was giving it away to people he'd never met, as compensation for harm he'd caused in pursuit of profits that had already made him wealthy beyond any reasonable need.
Marcus, she said, can I ask you something personal? After everything we've been through, I think you've earned the right. What's it like to have so much money that you can give away $20 million and still be rich? The question caught him off guard. He'd been wealthy for so long that he'd stopped thinking about money as something that could run out, stopped considering what financial security meant to people who lived paycheck to paycheck. Honestly, it's terrifying, he said. Not the having money part, the being responsible for it part. Every investment, every development, every business decision affects hundreds of people. Employees, contractors, residents of the communities where I build. For years, I convinced myself that creating jobs and increasing property values was enough to justify the displacement and disruption. But sitting here, looking at the actual costs, he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The actual cost is families scattered across 3 states because they can't afford to live in the city their grandparents helped build, Catherine said quietly. The actual cost is children who grow up disconnected from their cultural heritage because the community centers and family businesses that maintained those connections got bulldozed for luxury condos. Marcus nodded, accepting the judgment without defensiveness. How do I fix that? How do I undo 15 years of choosing profit over people? You don't, Eddie said from behind the counter, where he was methodically cleaning coffee cups that were already clean. You can't unscatter families or bring back bulldozed buildings, but you can stop making it worse. You can use your money and influence to help instead of hurt. Through the window, they could see the police officers maintaining their perimeter while news crews pressed against the barriers, trying to get closer to the story. Maria noticed a familiar figure among the reporters, Janet Morrison, the investigative journalist who'd covered the Filipino Community Center fire and its aftermath. If Janet was here, then this story was about to become much larger than a simple business dispute. Catherine noticed the same thing. Janet Morrison's here. She's been investigating connections between developers and city officials for months. If she gets hold of this story, she'll expose the corruption, Morrison, the dirty cops, whoever's been coordinating this. And she'll want to know why you're willing to pay $20 million in what looks like extortion money, Maria added. The implications were staggering. Within hours, Marcus Webb's business practices would be under scrutiny by one of Seattle's most tenacious investigative reporters. Every development project, every displaced family, every shortcut taken in pursuit of profit would be examined and exposed. "Good," Marcus said, surprising all of them. "Let her investigate. Let her ask questions. Let her hold me accountable for what I've done." Catherine stared at him. "You realize this could destroy you professionally, your reputation, your business relationships, your future projects?" "My reputation should be destroyed. My business relationships are built on exploitation, and my future projects?" Marcus looked around Harvey's diner, at the honest work and simple dignity it represented. "Maybe my future projects should be designed to help communities instead of displacing them." Maria felt something shift in the atmosphere of the diner, as if a storm that had been building for hours was finally beginning to break. Marcus Webb was no longer the defensive businessman who'd stumbled into her workplace 8 hours ago. He was becoming something else, someone willing to face the consequences of his choices and work to make amends. But even as she felt hope beginning to stir, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial. The people who'd orchestrated this crisis had demonstrated resources and coordination far beyond what community activists could muster. They'd corrupted police officers, organized professional surveillance, and threatened to burn down a building with innocent people inside. These weren't the tactics of grassroots organizers seeking justice. "Catherine," she said, "you mentioned that someone's been investigating connections between developers and city officials. What kind of connections?"
Catherine's expression grew grim. Bribery, mostly. Zoning approvals bought with campaign contributions. Environmental impact studies suppressed. Community input meetings that were pure theater. The usual corruption that happens when developers have more money than ethics. And Marcus was involved in that? His projects got approved faster and with fewer requirements than anyone else's. The Pike Place development sailed through processes that should have taken years and involved extensive community input. Either Marcus Webb is the luckiest developer in Seattle, or he's been paying for special treatment. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized what Catherine was implying. "You think I've been bribing officials?" "I think someone's been bribing officials on your behalf. The question is whether you knew about it." The possibility hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. David Sterling, his attorney and oldest friend, had handled all the regulatory approvals for his projects. The expedited timelines, the reduced environmental requirements, the zoning variances that other developers can't get. Marcus had assumed it was due to David's skill and connections. He'd never asked about the details, never wanted to know how the sausage was made. "David," he whispered. "Your attorney?" Catherine asked. "He's handled all my regulatory work for 15 years. If there's been bribery..." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts with hands that shook slightly. "If David's been paying bribes without my knowledge, using my money, then you're not just liable for displacement and community destruction," Catherine said. "You're liable for political corruption, fraud, conspiracy, federal charges that could put you in prison for decades." The revelation recontextualized everything. If David Sterling had been systematically bribing officials to smooth the approval process for Webb Industries projects, then Marcus wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was an unwitting participant in a criminal enterprise. And if the people threatening him had evidence of that corruption... "They don't want 20 million, Maria said, understanding flooding through her. "They want you to confess to federal crimes." Marcus stared at his phone, David Sterling's number highlighted on the screen. One call would confirm his worst fears or absolve him of charges that could destroy not just his business, but his freedom. But either way, the conversation would change everything. "Call him. Put it on speaker. Let's find out how deep this goes." Marcus dialed David's number with the feeling that he was detonating a bomb in his own life. The phone rang once, twice. "Marcus! Thank God! I've been trying to reach you for hours. Are you safe?" "I'm safe, David, for now. I need to ask you about something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Of course. What is it? The regulatory approvals for my projects, the expedited timelines, the reduced environmental requirements, the zoning variances that other developers can't get. How did you make that happen? The pause that followed told Marcus everything he needed to know. When David spoke again, his voice carried the careful tone of a lawyer choosing his words with extreme precision. Marcus, you're in a high-stress situation. This isn't the time to discuss complex business arrangements. Why don't you come to my office? We'll sit down privately.
David. Marcus's voice cut through the evasion like a blade. Did you bribe city officials to get my projects approved? Another pause, longer this time. I prefer the term facilitated regulatory efficiency. The euphemism hit the diner like a confession. Maria saw Catherine close her eyes in what might have been relief or resignation. Eddie shook his head grimly, and Marcus felt the last pieces of his old life crumbling away like sand. How much? He asked quietly. Over 15 years? Approximately $8 million in consulting fees, campaign contributions, and administrative facilitation payments. $8 million. Enough to rebuild the Filipino Community Center 10 times over. Enough to provide housing assistance to every family displaced by the Belltown Apartments project. Enough to fund Catherine Reeves' preservation efforts for the next 2 centuries. And I paid for all of it? The payments were structured as legitimate business expenses, legal fees, consulting services, regulatory compliance costs, all properly documented for tax purposes. Maria felt sick. Marcus Webb might not have known the details of his attorney's corruption, but he'd paid for every bribe while claiming ignorance of how his projects moved so smoothly through regulatory processes that stymied his competitors. David, Marcus said, his voice hollow with understanding. Who else knows about this? What do you mean? Someone's been threatening me, demanding $20 million, claiming to have evidence of my crimes against Seattle communities. If they have documentation of the bribes, that's impossible. All the payments were carefully structured to avoid. David stopped mid-sentence, and Marcus could almost hear him realizing the implications of what he'd just admitted. David, are you still there? Marcus, hang up the phone. Don't say anything else. Come to my office immediately. We need to discuss damage control and legal strategy. It's too late for damage control. I'm about to transfer $20 million to a fund for displaced residents, and I'm going to hold a press conference announcing the cancellation of Pike Place development. After that, I'm going to cooperate fully with any investigation into my business practices. Marcus, no! You can't. If you admit to anything, if you acknowledge any wrongdoing, you'll be confessing to federal crimes. I won't be able to protect you. I don't want your protection anymore, David. I want to fix what I've broken. Marcus ended the call and set the phone down with the finality of someone closing a book they'd never want to read again. Around him, Harvey's diner felt different. Not like a trap anymore, but like a sanctuary where truth could finally be spoken without fear of consequences. Well, that settles the question of whether you knew about the bribes. I should have known. I should have asked questions, demanded transparency, insisted on ethical practices. Willful ignorance isn't innocence. Maria reached across the table and covered his hand with hers again, the gesture becoming a habit between them. The question now is, what happens next? Marcus looked around the diner, at Maria, who'd risked everything to help a stranger, at Eddie, who'd been drawn into danger through simple decency, at Catherine, who'd set aside years' opposition to try to save his life. He thought about Mrs. Chen, terrified in her own home, about the families scattered by his developments, about the communities destroyed by his ambition. Now, he said, I try to become the person my father would have wanted me to be. Outside,
Janet Morrison was approaching the police perimeter, her press credentials gleaming in the morning sunlight. Soon, she'd be asking questions that would expose 15 years of corruption and displacement. Soon, the full story of Webb Industries' business practices would be front-page news across the Pacific Northwest. But Marcus Webb was no longer afraid of those questions. For the first time in 15 years, he was ready to tell the truth about the real cost of his success, and to begin the long process of paying it back. 3 hours later, Marcus Webb stood outside Harvey's diner, facing a wall of cameras and microphones. The $20 million had been transferred. The Pike Place project was officially canceled. Detective Morrison was in federal custody. "I've spent 15 years building a fortune on other people's displacement," Marcus told the reporters. "Today, I begin the process of making amends." Maria Santos watched from the diner's window, exhausted but oddly hopeful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thank you for helping me remember who I wanted to be." 6 months later, the Marcus Webb Community Restoration Fund had rebuilt the Filipino Community Center and provided housing assistance to 200 displaced families. Catherine Reeves served on the board, ensuring every dollar reached those who needed it most. Harvey's Diner received a historical preservation grant. Anonymous donor. Maria still worked the night shift, but now she also managed the diner's new community outreach program, connecting displaced families with resources and support. Eddie Martinez opened a second location in Georgetown, hiring former residents who'd been scattered by development projects. On quiet nights, when the rain painted Seattle's neon across wet asphalt, Maria would remember the morning when a millionaire learned that some things were worth more than money, and how sometimes saving someone else meant saving yourself. Marcus never ate at Harvey's Diner again, but every month an envelope arrived with a handwritten note, "For the community, M.W." Inside was always a check for exactly what the diner needed that month. No more, no less. Some storms, Maria learned, were worth weathering. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.